From enemies to friends, Nick Paul is a Leaf! So, here I am, back in the Blue Room. I'm shooting this on the evening of July 1st. Producer Drew is not going to edit it until the morning of July 2nd because we were both at the office all day. This is a great example of why you should be careful what you wish for. Because Brad Treliving, as Leafs GM, I kept screaming, Brad! And sometimes I followed that up with, do something! Then John Chayka came aboard, and he said, actually, Steve, it's John Chayka. And I said, oh, okay, so it's John Chayka. And he did 8 things on just July 1st. He did 8 things on July 1st. Were they good and smart things? Well, now you're asking the right questions. The Toronto Maple Leafs acquire Nick Paul from the Tampa Bay Lightning, who I didn't even know was on the chopping block, but apparently he was, in exchange for Dennis Hildeby, the Hildebeest, and a 3rd-round pick in 2028 and a 4th-round pick in 2027. Now, in terms of getting a backup goalie that makes sense for the Tampa Bay Lightning, this is a smash home run for them. The Leafs goalie situation is so genuinely weird, but I think it's going to end up pretty good. Earlier today, they signed Sergey Bobrovsky to $7 million for 3 years. And some people are hesitant about giving $7 million for 3 years to a 37-year-old, and I'm here to put your mind at ease. Actually, by the time the season begins, he'll be 38. Can everyone please stop yelling and shouting about how old and decrepit that is? That is how old I am. And look at me! I'm in the prime of my life! Apart from being a good goaltender, and we'll get to that, Dennis Hildeby has 2 years left on his deal, $841,667 as his cap hit. This is, the evidence shows, an NHL goalie. Can he perform the Herculean task of being the backup goalie to Andrei Vasilevsky? I think he can. Jonas Johansson still has another year left on his deal. What are the Lightning going to do about that? Waive him, pretty sure, or trade him. You never know. All I know is you just acquired a 24-year-old goalie who is 6'7" and was 3rd in the entire NHL in save percentage among goalies who played at least 20 games. Now, he played exactly 20 games on a team that was awful, but Dennis Hildeby was legitimately the Leafs' best goalie last year. But as weird fate would have it, while Hildeby's up, Artur Akhtumov is getting more playing time down with the Marlies. He ends up being the Marlies' starting goalie when the playoffs begin. Then he becomes the sole reason why they're winning a lot of hockey games. And then he wins AHL playoff MVP en route to winning the Calder Cup. So his stock shot through the roof in the Leafs organization while everything was in flux. Treliving is fired, Chayka comes in, Wool is traded in the middle of all that, and that made sense because Akhtumov won't require waivers next year. Let's say he starts with the Marlies. That's a good assumption. Hildeby will be the backup to Stolarz now that Wool has been traded. They're both huge. Hildeby tries to model his game after Stolarz. That makes sense. Now here's the problem. Anthony Stolarz, at his best, is an incredible goalie. He had the highest save percentage in the NHL 2 years in a row with 2 different teams, one with Florida and one with Toronto. The cons are he's made of paper mache. I say that with love. I say that being cheeky. Anthony Stolarz at his best is incredible. And when he stuck up for himself early in the season, what sunk the Leafs wasn't the fact that he called them out. It was that they didn't do anything about it. They let him get run over after letting his season get ended in the playoffs the year before, months before. And then they didn't do anything. But then free agency rolls around and they get Sergey Bobrovsky. Now they're not trading Stolarz because a big part of the reason that Bobrovsky came to Toronto is to play with Anthony Stolarz. I said repeatedly today that Stolarz won 2 cups with Bobrovsky. That's not true. He won 1 cup with Sergey Bobrovsky. And then, most notably, en route to winning his 2nd cup, Sam Bennett concussed Anthony Stolarz and Bobrovsky beat Stolarz' Leafs. Thank you, Sam. And also the NHL for doing nothing about it. It was an accident, they're friends! I had briefly wondered about the idea of, okay, Bobrovsky's going to be 38, Stolarz has had extensive injuries, maybe Hildeby stays up with the Leafs as a third goalie, and they go with a Thrandom. Then they made this trade, and it was obvious that wasn't going to happen. It kind of makes sense, because here's the problem. John Chayka wants to make moves. John Chayka wants to improve this team, and doing that through free agency is not always the best move. The Leafs made several moves throughout the day where I'm like, okay, that's a fine depth player. Maybe you overpaid for him a little bit. Who's going to be the third line center? Is it Bluger? I like him, but Is it going to be Sissons? I like him, but Is it going to be Roslovic? I like him, but I'm not even sure he's a center. Not a full-time one anyway. You're looking to take a defensive burden off of Matthews, and your plan is to put Roslovic at... No, it doesn't work. In order to get the player that you want, you're going to have to go out and trade for them. All of a sudden, with Bobrovsky and Stolarz, and obviously Akhtyamov in the minors and the emergence of him, now Hildeby all of a sudden becomes a valuable trade chip. And they use it to go out and get Nick Paul, who has 3 years left on a deal that pays him $3.15 million. It's really, really difficult for me to imagine a world where Nick Paul is not worth at least that going forward with a rising cap. If you're worried about losing Hildeby, sure, but the Lightning should be worried about losing Paul. Nick Paul is a 6'4", 234-pound center who skates like a mastodon. That actually doesn't help you figure out if he's fast or not. I just wanted to say mastodon. We don't use it enough. Would the Utah Mastodons have been better? Mastodon. Anyway, he's fast! The guy is fast. The guy takes hundreds and hundreds of faceoffs. I believe the number was over 550 from this past season. From the 7-game Habs Lightning series that I streamed during the playoffs, the Lightning were a completely different team with and without Nick Paul. When he wasn't in the lineup, you could tell. When he was in the lineup, you could tell. The Lightning were better with Nick Paul, had more of the puck. Didn't help. Ultimately, they lost. I don't think that was Nick Paul's fault. Now, here's the problem, and this is part of the reason that I worry about Tampa so willingly giving this player to the Toronto Maple Leafs. Last season, Nick Paul's production fell off a cliff, and then it rolled around a little bit, and then it fell off another larger cliff. He had 24 goals in 82 games, then he had 22 goals in 76 games. In this past season, he had 7 goals in 51 games. He had 46 points, and then he had 41 points, and then he had 15 points. Season over season, 2 years ago, he had a 58.1% goals for percentage. This is all from Puckpedia. Thank you to them. And this past season was 37.5. That's horrible. Now, his expected goals for percentage has remained pretty consistent. Over the last 3 years, it was 50, then 49, then 50. Ultimately, with Nick Paul, the Leafs are going to have to count on a bit of a bounce back from him, and it's reasonable to expect that. That's what he's been for the last few years. Guys like Bluger and Sissons and Duhaime, who the Leafs have signed, are going to be used more in exclusively defensive roles. Nick Paul can definitely do that, but he's going to be more of your two-way guy at third-line center, because you can't just have, all right, this is our scoring half of the lineup, and this is our defending half of the lineup. Jesse Blake and I had a great discussion oh my God, we recorded so much content today on the SDPN YouTube channel, I don't even remember when the conversation happened. But he talked about the Leafs' third line, and he's like, how is that going to go up against the Florida Panthers' third line? Which right now is Anton Lundell, Eetu Luostarinen, and Brad Marchand. And I was like, well, there is no way of going head-to-head against that third line. The Florida Panthers' third line is exclusively Olympians. That's insane. A Finnish Olympian, a Swedish Olympian, and a Canadian Olympian. How are you supposed to compete with that? And he was just sort of like, exactly. Which is to say, okay, maybe you can't replicate that right now, but you should try. To simplify it even more, you need to at least try to be better than you are. This trade is the Leafs trying to be better than they are. Which is to say, it's the Leafs trying to improve, which is something you should always do. Now, it should be mentioned, Paul is not always a center. He can play some wing. I feel like he's going to be a center here. I feel like that's what makes the most sense. Right now, Puckpedia has it lined up. McKenna, Matthews, Nyes, Cowan, Tavares, Nylander, Paul, Sissons, Roslovic, Joshua, Bluger, Duhaime, with Steven Lorentz as an extra. Right now, the way it is, my best guess is something more along the lines of Cowan, Matthews, Roslovic. I know, it's odd, right? McKenna, Tavares, Nylander. And you might be like, where's Nyes? Oh, are you assuming Nyes is getting traded? Well, here's an idea. Imagine a checking line of Nyes, Paul, Sissons. Sissons is 6'1", 200. Nyes is 6'3", 231, and he says he wants to slim down. Like, okay, so what is that? 220, 215? And Paul is going to be something like 6'4", 230. They can skate, they're defensively responsible, and they can score. That is a very interesting third line. And then Joshua, Bluger, Duhaime with the option of Lorentz. Is that perfect? I don't know. Is that exactly how it's going to be? I don't know. But I tell you what, it's a hockey team, which the Leafs didn't have when today began. I looked at that roster of forwards and I said, they need to add to this badly because this is not a playoff roster. And then they promptly lost Michelli and Robertson. Michelli to free agency, he went to the Islanders, and Robertson was traded to the Penguins. Made a video about that on this channel. It's a hockey team, dude. Cowan and McKenna are so young that they're going to be wild cards. They're going to be up and down the lineup. I wouldn't be overly shocked, and people are gonna hate this, if one or both of Cowan and McKenna are healthy scratch for at least a couple games this season. They're young. It's not unusual. It does happen. Paul obviously needs to bounce back, and he needs to cure what's ailed him. Sissons just had a very long playoff run, but that is a guy who is going to allow Austin Matthews to start more of his shifts in the offensive zone and take the defensive burden off him, which was ridiculous under Berube in both seasons. Teddy Bluger will also help with that for similar reasons. Dakota Joshua is now a guy I'm looking at where, like, you're interesting and I kind of like that player, but also I wonder if the Leafs try to trade him. Brandon Duhaime is another guy who hits a lot, blocks a lot, can kill penalties. Between Sissons, Bluger, Paul, and Duhaime, the Leafs have completely redone who's going to be on their penalty kill, and add to that Nyes and Matthews. And then, even though he can be somewhat of a defensive liability at times, you get a guy who can skate and score in Jack Roslovic. He scored over 20 goals in each of his last 2 seasons, with 2 completely different teams in Carolina and Edmonton. In net, you have Bobrovsky and Stolarz. Are there question marks? Are there concerns? Absolutely. But you know what the Leafs haven't had in a very long time? You know what they haven't had post-COVID? A starter. No. I'm not talking about a goalie who's played well. I'm not talking about a goalie who has played in the role of starter. I'm talking about an honest-to-goodness, full-time starter. Who? Who then? Okay? You got Freddie Anderson, right? Leading into 2019, we're going to say. Then in the bubble, it was kind of Freddie, but he wasn't playing very well. And you got Jack Campbell, who's coming in, and who is it? Who's it going to be? 2021, the Leafs take on the Montreal Canadiens, and yes, they choked, and no, it was not Jack Campbell's fault. But at the end of the day, you're heading into a series with Jack Campbell as your starter going up against Carey Price. The next year, you go into a playoff series with Jack Campbell as your starter against Andrei Vasilevsky. Then you end up beating Andrei Vasilevsky with Ilya Samsonov, but in the second round, it's Ilya Samsonov against Sergey Bobrovsky, and then Joseph Woll. 2024, you're going up against the Boston Bruins with Ilya Samsonov against Jeremy Swayman, and Woll comes in and saves the day, and then he gets hurt, and it's Samsonov against Swayman again. 2025, you should have beat the Sens, and thank goodness you beat the Sens. It wasn't a repeat of 2021. It was Ullmark versus Stolarz, but Stolarz at the time was the back-to-back save percentage champion of the NHL. Then you head into the 2025 series against the Florida Panthers, and it's Sergey Bobrovsky against the guy who was most recently his backup. And I tell you what, that matchup was actually going pretty well until Sam Bennett took him out. And then, once Sam Bennett took him out, it's Joseph Woll against Sergey Bobrovsky. And now, yes, he's coming off of an awful year with Florida. You have Sergey Bobrovsky. Is health a concern? Sure. He's about to turn 38, and he's had a bunch of significant injuries in his career. Okay, Since the 2019-2020 season, Sergey Bobrovsky is 5th in the NHL in games started. That's a thing that's pretty hard to do when you're injured all the time. Last season, he started 52 games, which was 11th in the NHL, on a team that stunk. Steve, that was the Florida Panthers? No, it very wasn't. For a giant swath of last season, the majority of the Panthers were actually Charlotte Checkers. Sam Reinhart missed 18 games. Brad Marchand missed 30 games. Matthew Tkachuk missed 51 games. Seth Jones missed 30 games. Aaron Ekblad missed 10. Alexander Barkov missed 82. Does an .877 save percentage last season suck? Yes. And that's what Sergey Bobrovsky had, but you could put Connor Hellebuyck and Andrei Vasilevsky in that net at the same time. They were not going to drag that iteration of the Florida Panthers into the playoffs. They had no Barkov, they had no Tkachuk, they stayed afloat for as long as they could. Brad Marchand was incredible, and then he goes down with an injury, and then everyone by the end of the season, it was a disgrace by the end of the season. The Panthers stunk once, and it was obvious why, and then they got the 9th overall pick, and they used it to get Brady Tkachuk. It's not fair. But anyway, don't get sidetracked by that. I say all that to say, I'm pretty sure the goalie that when he had an actual team in front of him went to 3 straight Stanley Cup finals and won 2 of them. I'm pretty sure that goalie is a good goalie. Has he been injured in his career? Yes. But in recent years, Sergey Bobrovsky has been healthy enough to play more games than almost any other goalie. Bobrovsky has played in 50 or more games in each of the last 5 seasons. Then he played 31 games in a 56-game shortened season, which is the equivalent of 45 games. He played 50 games in the 2019-20 season, which was cut short because of COVID. And in his final 3 years in Columbus, he played 62, 65, and 63. He might get hurt this upcoming season, and a tree might fall through this studio ceiling by the end of the sentence. After dealing with some pretty significant problems earlier in his career, Sergey Bobrovsky has been one of the most durable goaltenders in the NHL for at least half a decade. Listen, the Leafs have to get to the playoffs first. That's hard, especially in the Atlantic Division. But once you get there, you will be armed with a starter who has been there, a starter who has done it, a starter who has won it. The Leafs have not had a ton of goalies in recent memory who have won a cup. There was Matt Murray, but Matt Murray had turned into a pumpkin years prior to coming here and after winning those cups. Then you're going all the way back to a barbecued J.S. Jaguar and an ancient but surprisingly effective Ed Belfour. Meanwhile, Sergey Bobrovsky was holding the Stanley Cup above his head 12 months ago. Is this insanely optimistic cope? Maybe. But doing something like Stolar's Hildeby was far from a guarantee. Doing a thrandom of Stolar's Hildeby Akhtimov, far from a guarantee. Hildeby looked great in the 20 games that he played. His record was terrible. In the season before, he was awful. Artur Akhtimov was great in the American Hockey League, and then he called up, played a few games, granted behind a team that stunk, and he wasn't very good. And you could go with that question mark or Sergey Bobrovsky. The Leafs chose Bobrovsky. So what do you think of what the Leafs have done so far? Because what I'm seeing a little bit out there is people treating the Leafs like they're done. I don't think they're done. I'm barely even convinced John Chaika likes the team he inherited. Look at everything he's done to it. All the nice stuff went away today. It sounds like Werenski's staying in Columbus for now. How long does that remain true? And let's not pretend like Zach Werenski is the only player who has come up in Matthew Knies rumors. Okay, forget Matthew Knies. What about Morgan Riley? Because that was a thing, and then it went away a little bit. And now Darren Dreger is out here saying that it very much sounds like Morgan Riley is going to be on the move. Oh, what are they even going to get? Dude, the Edmonton Oilers just traded Darnell Nurse, no salary retained, for 2 legitimate assets, like a player who's going to play for the Oilers and a prospect. What? If you want to know how much the cap has gone up, that's how much the cap has gone up. John Chaika's done so much, and I still don't think he's even close to done. The only reason moves have stopped is I think he went to bed. And actually, now that I think of it, I'm not actually convinced that's a thing he does. There's no footage of it. Have you ever seen it? I think it's because all the other GMs went to bed, because They're made of like flesh and bone and everything. John Chaika, I'm not saying he's related to Ultron, but I'm fairly certain they've been to the same parties. It's become more and more obvious that the day he got this job, John Chaika looked at this roster and said, I think a lot about meteors. The purity of them. Boom. The end. Start again. World made clean for the new man to rebuild. Is that not what he's done in like a month? He traded Joseph Woll and Simone Benoit for Sammy Urson and Emile Andre. Then he traded Sammy Urson. Went out and got Darren Radish. Traded Brandon Carlo. The day after drafting Gavin McKenna first overall. Re-signed Troy Stetcher. Signed Jack Roslovic, Sergey Bobrovsky, Colton Sissons, Teddy Bluger, Brandon Duane, Zach McEwen. Traded Nick Robertson and acquired Nick Paul. He had 2 trades today with a guy named Nick. John Chaika has itchy thumbs, and there's only one way to alleviate it, and that is to make moves. I can't tell if they're good or bad yet, but they're exciting. You tell me if they're good or bad or exciting. Let me know in the comments down below. For now, that is it for this one. Thank you very much for watching. Click like if you like this video. Click subscribe if you really liked it. Tell your friends. Dude, there's so many videos on this channel from yesterday. There's so much content on the SDPN YouTube channel. You've got to check it out. I'm so proud of the work that we've done. We killed it. Every year we kill it. Let me brag for a minute. We kill it every year. This year we killed it. Killed it. Got to check it out. I'm going to bed.